So welcome everybody, the training, learning, and development community. Thanks for joining us. We have a ton of people in for this one. Mo, you must be a really popular person because there are over 60 people or 60 or so that are registered for this one, and we usually don't get that many. So
Woohoo!
that is pretty impressive. So welcome everybody. Let me give some shout outs. Let's see, who do we have in? Alan's here, Carlita, YC Gan, Christine, Chitty, Lane is here. Yeah, even Jonathan Hill and Cheryl, Vanessa. Gosh, so many. Thanks for joining us. All right, so we're going to be talking about comics and learning design here with Moe Ash. Is that did I pronounce that okay? Is it just Mo?
100%.
Excellent. All right, and so Mo, I know that you've got your company, The Catalyst, but can you give us a quick intro to yourself? I'd love to hear how you describe yourself.
Well, I would say I'm a learning architect. I don't really work in a specific domain when it comes to learning interventions or creating learning design. Our company is an instructional design establishment, but we also work on building gamification systems for companies, specifically in learning, obviously. And also we do escape rooms, we do board game simulations. Some of that are physical, other are online, and we do e-learning design. So it's a little bit of this, a little bit of that. So you know what? It's architecture. And that's how I'm doing my thing. Before that, I used to work in L&D consultancy. My background is in human resources management, as a matter of fact. I'm a trainer by practice, but you know what? I found myself in learning design. I just stayed there. So that's it in a nutshell, I suppose.
Nice. No, that works perfectly. And you're based out of Cairo, Egypt. And so we've got you there late in the evening, 10 p.m., or at least late to some people. But we're going to be talking about comics. Now, the way that I was introduced to Mo was Mo actually tagged me in a video that he had done on LinkedIn and posted it. And it was very interesting to me. He talked about heuristics. And I have always been curious about comics and learning design. And especially for myself, as being somebody who used to be a comic book collector when I was a kid. And now I have an 8-year-old who is heavy into graphic novels. And so my love for comics are coming back. And I thought, wow, this would be great to reach out to Mo and just see what, let's talk more about this thing that you, this video you posted on LinkedIn. But I wanted to ask you first, Mo, comics, your relationship to comics, where did that start?
I don't know, maybe when I was like 10 or 7. And although I'm a DC person, I am totally up for DC. True, I am actually wearing Marvel flip-flops right now, but I am still DC. I started off with X-Men and X-Men, American Splendor, the funnies in the newspaper. And then later on, it just rolled over from there. And there are also like Arabic comics that no one would know about here. But it kind of shaped my culture. I mean, it shaped the way I understand things. It actually educated me. I'm a product of comics. If it wasn't for comics, I wouldn't have learned about a lot of things.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how I think about like comics. That kind of I grew with comics and comics grew with me, and that's how it led me to manga, and it led me also to anime. To those who do not know what manga is the Japanese side of comics, and it even has a different sequence. On like comics, it starts from left to right, but manga starts from right to left, and over time you kind of build up that understanding of how to go through reading each and every one of them, and it becomes easy, like cognitively easy, to see how events like start to unfold when it comes to comics. So it helped me understand more about aesthetics. It helped me understand more about science. It helped me understand more about cultures, about your culture, as a matter of fact, like across the pond, the other side of the world. And yeah, that's what I could say about it. Yeah.
Right. No, totally get it. And if you were, especially like if you start out with the X-Men and learning about, our culture, I'm sure that that you were learning a ton from reading those comics about what it was like over here. But where exactly did your love for comics and learning design begin? Where did you start attaching the two?
Hold on? Can you repeat the last part? I couldn't hear
Yeah,
you.
sure.
Hold on.
Sure.
Let me disconnect my speakers. All of a sudden, I cannot hear.
Yeah, Kim is saying, I just want to say in chat, Kim's saying, I think we'd be surprised to know how influential comics have been in the world. And I totally agree with that.
Okay, now I can hear you. I'm so sorry.
Oh, it's okay.
So sorry for that.
All right. So
My bad.
you can hear me. So storytelling, learning design, like where did that and comics, when did you start putting that together?
I guess every time I think about like building a learning asset, to me, even infographics is actually a form of comics. Like the first time I got introduced to infographics, I thought, well, I'm so sorry to say this, but it was mundane and annoying because why can't we stick to comic panels? Why can't we stick to the usual way of how we see the aesthetics of an infographic to be easy? Like sometimes infographic can be so confusing and data is just clustered in different areas across the infographic, and you need to have a very hard time trying to understand where to look instead of trying to understand the learning that it is trying to offer instead. And to me, infographics are actually comics. They're learning comics, but we don't really treat it that way. So from an aesthetic point of view, there's something called a mental model. Like mental models are how we see the world. Like for instance, are you a Mac user or a Windows user? Just to ask.
Great. Yeah, I'm a Mac user.
Okay, so where's the escape button?
Where is the escape button? Yeah, upper left.
Exactly. For Windows users, it's actually up on the right.
Is it? Wow.
It is. It is my mental model. That's why when I use my wife's Mac, I'm bedazzled. I'm like, where command instead of control?
Yeah.
This is what a mental model is. We're used to certain things and how to perceive the world around us.
Mm-hmm.
And it becomes easy for us. That's where availability heuristics come into place, because it becomes easy for us to see everything, perceive everything. They're mental shortcuts, because even when it comes to reading, we, from a neuroscience perspective, we are accustomed to be able to read things because we already know shapes and forms since the day we were born. That's why when you see an O, it represents an orange or an apple, or so. It's okay. An O, a zero, I can understand this. If we put two shapes across one another, you can see a T, you can see an M. Even if you got like chopsticks or like any sticks and you just throw it, whatever it is, you can still see a T, you can still see an M, you can still see an N. It's our mental model that would allow us to see things. So mental models make it easy for us to perceive a lot of things. When we go against those mental models or opposite to it, it becomes very harder for us to understand things. And it becomes a cognitive load for us to try to fathom it instead of trying to eat on it or like build a learning or an understanding about it. So when learning designers start to build things that are too traditional, like death by PowerPoint, for instance, it is already a mental shortcut that says this is boring, this is mundane. But when you do something that goes against it, but it's easy to comprehend, it starts to become better, and it resonates, and people start to anchor it, and people start to put it up on their long-term memory, and it becomes a positive experience that I can benefit from. So that's when I look into even when I was a trainer, before I get into like the whole thing about learning design, I would take hours and hours just to think about, okay, so I am talking to this audience. How would I build my presentation? What kind of aesthetics? Who am I speaking to? What kind of character, even the characters that I'm going to be putting up, would they relate to it? Would it be easier for them to build a sense of like a similarity bias between them and they? Like, okay, I can see this is my colleague, this is someone that I can find in my company, or this is, if it's for like university students, okay, this is how I would look like in uni. So this is how it consumed me from the start, that I like to see someone that looks like me. Because in comics, although we're talking about like superheroes, but superheroes are sort of relatable. And I said that in the video, like Superman, when it started to come out in the late 30s, he was a god, like the representation of a messiah. And over time, sales started to drop, by the way, because Superman basically was indestructible. No one can beat Superman. But Batman, for instance, well, we can relate to Batman. Batman, although he's a millionaire, billionaire, gazillionaire, come what may, he's using his wits and being smart and his gadgets and his tool belt that he built up on his own to create things. So, you know what? I can be like that. I can be like Batman if I had the means and the power to do so. And also, most of them are dealing with issues, like they're orphans, they have problems. So yeah, well, that person is vulnerable. That person is like me. That person I can relate to in a way or another. This is how comics make us feel more human, and make us feel like, okay, even though I didn't jump into a pool of radioactive material, I can still be able to do the same things that they are doing.
Nice. So let's talk about that. So if you're building, say, some training, and you've decided to use comics as part of that curriculum, like, do you decide on establishing some archetypes to provide that sort of relatability? Is that where you start, or tell us how you like go about, just constructing this stuff?
Okay. So one time we did this game. It's called the Tale of Hermes, and it was called the Oracle, and it was the Tale of Hermes. So the Oracle was a storytelling game, where the audience would start to construct a story one card after the other. So you will be putting up a card, which is part of the Hermes tale, and another person will put another card to continue on the story. And the point of the matter was that the Oracle stripped Hermes from all of his powers, and Hermes needs to go onto a journey to regain his power, and he has to live life like a mortal, and his powers will be decided through the decisions of the oracles of Delphi. And the oracles, which are the audience, are starting to put up how the story would go. And how I built this, I wanted a character that has a lot of powers, and those powers I can relate to in terms of skills, application, and matters that are related to the learning objective that I'm putting up. So every time Hermes gains up a skill, well, they earned that skill because they managed to get that learning into place. They managed to maintain that knowledge assessment in a perfect manner. They managed to acquire a newfound knowledge into the learning itself. So they get a power from Hermes' power, and they gain points. Now, throughout the story, they are the fate is decided by the oracles of Delphi. So I had to do a full-on research on Hermes, the other gods, different mythologies, and Hermes, how good is he? How is he affected by other gods? Should I get other gods instead of this? Why am I sticking to Greek mythology? But the archetype, I wanted someone that is so versatile to do this for. And it didn't start off with Hermes, to be completely honest. It started off that I wanted something where the audience can have a lot of autonomy and control so they can decide what to do. And this is where the oracles came into place. So I started with the oracles, which are the supporting character, and then I went into the protagonist, which is Hermes. And even when I used to deliver storytelling back in 6-7 years ago, I used to tell people about something called the universal story structure. And the universal story structure is something that a guy called Gustav Freytag, he created 100 years ago. And it all starts the same and it ends the same with a little bit of nuances here and there. It starts always with an expose, which is the story, the introduction, what happens, and then a rising action where, okay, I start to understand there's an oracle, a head oracle, and there are the other oracles of Delphi, and there's a problem. Hermes is pretty baffled at what human beings are, and they don't deserve to live the life that they're living, and we immortal gods are so much better. I'm just explaining the whole thing. And there are climax. So when the climax comes up, Hermes is stripped out of everything, and he needs to go on to his journey. So this is the climax. A problem starts to come into place. And then the falling action. The falling action, Hermes goes into his journey, he starts to collect stuff, and then at the end, the denouement or the closure. So the time span of this is different depending on where you want to put the focus of the story and where you put the learning. So maybe you want to put up the learning at the fall of the rising action. Maybe you want to put a huge time in the form of a case study, maybe at the climax, or maybe you want people to be accumulating knowledge, and then during the falling action you're putting it all for practice or putting it all for knowledge acquisition until they get to that end mile, which is the denouement. And it differs from one person to from one story structure to the other. There you have something called the mountain technique, which is an expose, climax, another action, then the climax, and another action, climax, and it goes on, like Game of Thrones, for instance. It was full of climaxes,
right,
and cliffhangers,
right.
And there's something called a monomyth. I love monomyth because most of our stories are monomyth, like Spider-Man. With great power comes great responsibility. He went into his journey to understand this, to understand what Uncle Ben said. And you have the Lion King. They're all monomyth. He's just going on his journey to understand something. Right. So using those story structures, you start to know where to encapsulate the learning that you want, and where you want to encapsulate the story's essence. Like, okay, is the essence in learning something and building upon it and reinforcing? Or is the story where you would give them an experience and they need to reflect on it? Or is the story that they need to go and practice right away and then deal with the consequences of it? This is how you put story structure into learning design. And this is how we also even consider gamification. Like gamification at the end of the day is it's laying a motivational system across an existing solid learning design structure to be able to motivate people to go from one point to the other. That's why there's a mechanic in storytelling in gamification called the progression system, like how you will maintain a seamless progression that can go from one point to the other to the end of the game or to the end of the story, so they can get to the learning objective at the end. So when I think about comics, I really need to consider what kind of character, Hermes, is he relatable? Yes, when you strip down his powers. Is the oracles relatable? Yes, because decisions that we take are the oracle, and this is what we do every day. And I start to put analogies. Stories are all about analogies that you make in life. Although maybe your cup of tea is not Fantasia, it could be drama, it could be comedy. As much as possible, let me feel that I'm part of the story. That this, although far-fetched it could be, I can do something like it. I can be something like it.
Yeah. Now let me just back up a little bit to the comic part with the cards, right? Is that something, did you illustrate these cards so that they had certain elements in it that that like the relatability pieces and that type of thing? Is that where the comics came in with that card? And also, how effective was that? Like, how effective was the training and the learning in that instance?
The learning was actually pretty neat, to be completely honest, because we only had like 2 hours to play this game, and it was a bit complicated to think about it at first, because they weren't only building up the story of Hermes. They were also doing something else. What we did is that we were trying to tell them how to construct a story, how to construct a learning in the form of a story. You can, I can send you the link to it. Here it is. Let me send you the link to it. I'm going to put it up in the chat so people can check it out themselves. That's the Oracle.
Nice.
And yeah, it's like one of the oracles. Like, we had like different oracles. This is like one of the oracles. I guess that's Lysenia, one of the oracles. So they had to look at a card, and the card was dissected into two. Part of Hermes' tale, and the other part is the lesson plan of building up a story learning design. So they had to think as a group, okay, I am going to be putting this part of the story, and also I am going to be putting this part of the learning. So if someone put this after me, I need to continue on the learning sequence. Also, I need to continue on the story sequence. And we kind of forced them, me and my team, when we were doing this, we kind of forced them to think, okay, if you're building up the story, you need to put it in sync with the learning design and the lesson plan and the instructional method that you're intending for your learners, whether that was in the form of a quiz or a practice of some sort, to be able to, when you're done with the whole thing, like when you're done with the absolute story, you created a story and a learning. Look at that. See, it's easy. So that was our intention at that time. And then we took the story of Hermes, to be completely honest, and then we just started to replicate it onto other stuff. Like, we did it first at GameCon, and then we were like, you know what? This is a good infrastructure to use with other stuff.
Yeah, no, that sounds like it would be a lot of fun, and it would take a great deal of creativity to produce. Now, going back to comics, let's take the gamification out. Let's talk about instructional comics without the gamification. Is that something that you create on a regular basis or have done? Because I know that we have learned, the both of us and probably most everybody in the audience has learned a ton from comics as entertainment, be it, Spider-Man or Superman or Batman or anybody else out there, any of these superheroes. But when you're doing your learning experience design, do you do anything where you're just using straight comics without gamification?
All the way. We could do comics in the form of branching scenarios.
Right.
Like, the comic itself, it tells you, like, for compliance training, for instance, compliance. I am telling a story about someone that is getting introduced into a company, and I don't really need to do it in a way where this is the code of conduct. This is what you should do at the company. What I do is, okay, this is a tour inside of the company itself. So, like, for instance, we took pictures of, I told the HR representative, like, take pictures of the offices, take pictures of the places, take pictures of the things that people will go for when they're doing their orientation when they first come in, and let me handle the rest. So we took it, we started to sketch it, and we did a complete virtual toonified tour of the entire thing using e-learning. So people, before they even got into the company, they already saw the toon version, the comic version of their company up front. So when they got into like got into the job, they started to relate to like, this. Yeah, this is HR. This is marketing. This is where operations at, and it gave a sense of likability. And also, people felt very familiar with the workplace before they even got on board in the workplace itself. So, comics can be used for compliance, where we got people to have an actual introduction to the company itself, what they would do, what do you think will be the first action that you would do on the job, if you had a problem, where you would go through, what you would, who you would talk to. So we actually made them know who are the people, where are the offices, what to do before even stepping a foot inside of the organization itself. And there was no gamification about it. It's just pure good e-learning with good aesthetics.
So obviously, because of those comics, or producing things in that format, you had much better engagement.
Amen.
Yeah.
Amen. Because the thing is about comics, and I'm going to be like piggybacking on what Kathy Moore said in Action Mapping. All you need to do when it comes to comics, and thank you, Kim, for saying Haji Kamal, it's one decision at a time, one decision per slide. You don't need to put a lot of panels. You don't need to put a lot of data. Like, let me put it in a rudimentary from a rudimentary perspective. Like, even when we're using PowerPoint, and you're not using the animation factor, animation meaning that you're not controlling the transcendence of the data, one sentence, one point at a time, it becomes an absolute cognitive load on the learner. Because there are so many decisions, there's so many data, she wouldn't be able to absorb what you're saying on stage while reading what is on the screen or what's being put up on the projector in the PPT. So I always tell my trainers, like, put it one slide at a time, control the load. In comics, it's not only controlling the load, it's controlling the load and controlling the amount of decisions the learner needs to go through one slide at a time. If you feed them way too much, they would get way too convoluted into the whole thing. They would get really, they would get into a sense of dissonance. They wouldn't know what to do. So Haji Kamal, which is a great example, is you had to go through one decision to go to the other one and the other one and the other one. And what happens is, from a constructivism perspective, which is school of constructivism and educational psychology, is that you're putting up a chunking that allows a constructive cognitive sequencing of events. So when people need to track back and look at things from a retrospective, they know where they started from and where to go to where they need to do. And it helps also in assimilating and accommodating the data inside of your long-term memory, especially if the experience is actually fruitful or fun. So they would know the sequence, they would know the steps, it's chunked in a proper fashion, and you know what? It makes sense. I can apply it myself. But if it's too much data, they would get confused and they might not even continue on the experience.
Wow. No, that makes a ton of sense. And I'm thinking some folks in the audience, they see the title of this, Comics and Learning Design. And by the way, everybody, if you do have any questions, please post them in chat, and I'm sure Mo would be happy to answer them. But if somebody did want to get more experience in, say, using comics for their learning design, where can they go? What can they do aside from following you on LinkedIn, of course? But do you have any suggestions for that?
Well, there is. I could simply say you need to read comics itself, because comics sometimes the banners, like, let me try to show you something pretty quick. I think I have it here. Comics at the end of the day are just words and pictures. You can do anything with words and pictures, and that's what Harvey Pecker said. Oh, my screen is hold on.
There we
Much
go.
better.
I just
is that better?
Yeah.
Is it readable?
Yes.
Okay, so comics are just words and pictures. You can do anything with words and pictures. So that's what Harvey Pecker said. So, and the point is, there's a really good book that you should check, which is The Visual Language of Comics: Introduction to the Structure and the Cognition of Sequential Images. This is by an author called Neil Cohen, and that can give you a very good understanding of how to put comics into proper perspective, not only for learning, but basically for explaining anything. Because comics, as much as it's an art, it's actually a language. It has its own set grammar. It has its own way of putting aspects together. And I told you this before, that like this is how it looks like. This is how comics are put up. It could be put up this way: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then you can put the 9 over there. You can also make it where 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. If it's manga, 9. It can be this way or the other way, depending on the culture, depending on who you're talking to. Also, you can put like a bigger picture up on the start of it, because usually when I was telling you about the mental models mean that people in comics, they start from the left and they go under and they read from that point. And this is called a Z mapping. So in order for you to understand the language of comics, that you need to understand that people read into a Z mapping structure. They read this way. So when you're putting up the data, you need to map the data where the eye is easily able to go through the sequencing of it. You don't need to put me on screen on my own. You can get back.
Thanks.
I'm done with my part. I felt awkward. I'm like, okay, I'm done with that part. I just wanted to show a couple of panels, and that's it.
Yeah, no, and I could see that Kevin's actually in the chat right now. Kev, if those of you who don't know Kevin, Kevin's one of the best humans in L&D, and you definitely should follow him wherever you can, and is, of course, another incredible comic expert that is in this space. And yeah, no, this is all fantastic. Let's see. Are any questions out there? I know that Ellen had posted something on the top about seeing some strong comic storytelling examples. And I'm wondering, Mo, if you had anything maybe for L&D. I mean, is there a comic book series that that is particularly, I know, like, recently I saw a lot of like how the Mouse duo of comics. I don't know if you were Mouse 1 and Mouse 2, those were recently like being banned from some schools here in the US, but those are, they're actually at my bedside, those some Holocaust comics that I think were incredible.
I don't know, but when you were talking right now, and this is absolutely random, but I remember the book "Who Moved My Cheese" about the two mouse and what they did. And till this day, people still explain it in change management programs.
Yes.
By the way, they explain it all the time, and it still makes sense. I mean, it still makes an effort. It's pretty basic, but it works. And I don't know. I can't really give people a reference for comics other than the one that I just shown by Neil Cohen, because that's the one that I read, and I use it as sort of a reference to me to be able to understand like how to put comics into perspective. But you know what? Depend on actual comics. I do depend on actual comics. Like sometimes, you know what? I am doing research. What is research? I am just going through the amount of comics that I have, and I'm reading. Yeah. And comics right now, you don't really need to you don't really need to buy like hard copies of comics. There's digital comics right now for even Marvel, DC, and the likelihood of any other type, and it still offers the same really good experience. But anyway, what I could tell you is it's not only it's not only aesthetic. You really need to look at the characters that you're putting. I know that you can get characters, stock characters from anywhere, but try to also think about how the characters look, where they look, because where they look, and that was a very not stupid, it was a very simple technique, like so stupefied, I don't know, very simple, like really simple. I was like, how did I not think about this? But when the character looks at the other panel, the sequence just flows. Like sometimes we put characters like floating characters in e-learning and they're just looking at you like this. And it's passive. But when they're looking at something, they're giving you a signal. It tells you subconsciously what to do, like how to go through things. And even the usage of words, like Superman flew off the ledge. Superman exploded off the ledge. I know it's simple, but from a neuroscience perspective, people would like lighten up when they read the word exploded. It gives a better dopamine effect on them. Like, wow, Superman did this. And it's those tiny things, like really tiny, makes a huge impact in building up comics from the point of literature and from the point of aesthetics. That's one thing. The other thing, try as much as possible when you're making comics to not get into the limbo of I need to make the perfect type of Dark Knight Christian Bale kind of character where he needs to go into something so complicated. A very simple story makes a huge difference in people's lives. Like that's why motivational videos are so in. It's not very in for me, but because it has a lot of emotions. So if your protagonist and antagonist do not portray emotion, raw emotion, people wouldn't be able to gravitate towards it. This is what I could tell you about it. So I'll try to put up under, like in the TLDC, I'll try to put up a couple of resources on graphic design and things that are related to aesthetics. But if it comes to the simple things, I want you to look at those simple biases. I want you to look at something called the Zeigarnik effect. The Zeigarnik effect. The Zeigarnik effect is, if you may to play with me this. If I said, 10 tararan, what would you do?
10 10.
10 10 10. Okay.
Yeah.
This is, if you didn't say the 10 10, your mind would be pretty much annoyed.
Yeah.
You're seeking closure. I need closure. So please, when you're putting up a story, you're putting up a learning asset, you need to put a form of closure. You can't leave the story open. So that's a bias. That's a cognitive bias. So read about this. Read about something called the von Restorff effect. Is when we're building up a comic, building up a story, and we're highlighting a pivotal moment, a certain key message. We are coloring a specific word. That's the von Restorff effect. Also, there's the Gestalt principles, like how we put signaling, how we put proximity of matters beside one another. The visuals beside the word. It's not too far from it, so people wouldn't be able to relate both the visual and the text. Those simple biases do wonders when you're building up comics. I am not approaching comics only from the perspective of comics. I look at behavioral psychology when I do this, also Mayer's 12 Principles of Multimedia, and read the book by the Nobel laureate, award winner, Daniel Kahneman, which is Nudge. How you're putting like simple, basic triggers that nudge the people taking a specific action. Nudge offers a huge body of research on how you can give people like seeds of ideas in comics where they can take actions that they never took before, or something that is so unusual, unexpected that, you know what, maybe if I did this, I'll get a different answer, or I'll be doing something that I'm not used to. This is how I'm approaching comics. Not that I have to see a comic and then copy it. I want to see how people behave, and let me try to mimic it or overcome the constant wrongdoing of behavior, and let me try to do something different. And in the video that I did, I'm so sorry, I'm taking a lot of airtime.
That's okay.
The video that I did, there were a couple of simple story structures. Like one is called Zero to Hero, which is you get someone that didn't have any basic knowledge of any sort, and you see the evolution of that person, one part after the other in a sequence fashion. And this gives me, as a learner, an understanding to see how I can map my progress and my means of development. There's something called the awakening. The awakening is Moe was a very bad manager. He did blah, 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 blah. And this is his road to salvation. There's also the adventure where Moe is going into, I feel so conceited by him saying my name more than once. Moe is getting into a story where he's collecting things, he's collecting data so he can overcome a specific challenge. These are all things that we can see in our workplace. You can make up a story of it using this simple story structure and try to see how people using simple basic decisions day by day, step by step, one slide after the other, they can get to be able to mimic those decisions, mimic those actions, and get into a behavioral change. Like they can change the behavior because it makes sense. It's simple. It has a structure. It has a process. Why can't I do it the same? Because I can't change you, Lewis. E-learning wouldn't change you. But if I give you the autonomy where you can think, you might take the decision of change.
Very interesting. Okay, so we should be wrapping it up pretty soon here. One quick question. We've got one from Mohammed. It is asking, how many characters do we need to build a perfect story structure?
Usually you don't even need an antagonist, by the way. Like people always say, okay, there's Frodo, then there has to be a Sauron. No. I mean, you can build a story with Gandalf the Grey and Frodo and all of the Fellowship, and it can still work.
Yeah.
It's still fine. I mean, you don't really need a bad guy to make up a good story. In Hermes, for instance, the Oracle, we didn't have a bad guy. All we did is Hermes lost his powers. He wants to regain his powers. The oracles would lead him, and that's basically it. So usually antagonist, protagonist, and then there are like supporting characters. The Dispatcher, which is Hagrid or Gandalf or Gollum or Dobby in Harry Potter. Those are like your helpers on the side. There's also the prize or the princess. Don't mean to be misogynist here, but I mean, there's a sweetheart in the story, there's someone like in Super Mario. And there are other people that come on the side, the Fellowship, like Legolas, anyone that can help you get to what you want. Or sometimes it's just a monomyth. I just need Frodo.
Right.
That's it.
No, great answer. Gosh, there have been a lot of incredible resources posted in chat. I mean, I saw the Watchmen in there, which Gavin posted. Yeah, which that one had a big impact on me when I was
Love the Watchmen.
Yeah, when I was reading comic books.
Minutemen. Yes.
But Mo, it sounds like you could talk for days about comics, about gamification, about storytelling. You have like a wealth of knowledge about this stuff, and you seem so passionate about it. It was great having you on the broadcast. Where can we go to get inspired by you some more? Do you have any place that you can share?
Well, I have my LinkedIn.
All right,
and, I have my LinkedIn, and the website, our website is thecatalyst.experience.com. I'll put it up in the chat if you may. That's our website. You can check us out there. And also we have a Facebook page, and I started to put up like videos. Last one was about like upskilling and reskilling, and I'm trying to like, you know what, dig in more unconventional topics that L&D don't usually go into, and maybe I'll start doing a YouTube channel. I don't really know. I'm thinking about it, but I'll get into that. I'm a newbie. I'm just starting off. So
it doesn't sound like it. It sounds like
day.
and I don't know if you see Kevin's post there, but maybe this is where that collab at DevLearn, the two of you could meet up in Las Vegas or something and do a session for us. I would definitely sign up for that, because that would be amazing between the both of you. All right. So with that, Mo, thanks again for doing this. This was great. I'm glad that we were able to get together. I'm definitely going to want to have you back and just to talk more about this. I would love to learn more about your ideas on gamification and storytelling. So I'm definitely going to keep that in mind. And everybody, you know, Kevin, Kim, everyone that jumped in today, thanks for attending this one. Tomorrow, we have a showcase with Meka Hatters. And then for those of you that did the Women of L&D event last week, I should have all the videos ready pretty soon, hoping to have a link to that in the newsletter on Monday. And so with that, I'm going to wrap things up. Mo, thanks again, and hope to see everyone soon. All right, bye, everybody.